Most people are taught a dangerous lie, that intelligence is proven by winning arguments. It sounds reasonable. If someone is wrong, you correct them. If they refuse to listen, you explain harder. If they challenge you, you defend yourself. But what if that's exactly how foolish people trap intelligent minds? Here's something most people never realize until it's too late. The fastest way to lose control of a situation is to argue with someone who has no interest in truth. Think about it. Have you ever walked away from an argument feeling exhausted, frustrated, and strangely powerless, even though you knew you were right? Why does that happen? Because the argument was never about facts. It was never about logic. It was never about finding the truth. It was about attention. And the moment you start fighting to prove yourself to a foolish person, you've already handed them your most valuable asset, your focus. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He recognized that power does not belong to the person who speaks the loudest. It belongs to the person who controls where their energy goes. Fools crave conflict. They feed on reactions. They want your outrage, your explanations, and your emotional investment. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The smarter you are, the easier it is to fall into their trap. Because intelligent people assume everyone is searching for understanding. Many people aren't. They're searching for validation. They're protecting their ego. They're fighting battles that exist only inside their own minds. And the moment you understand this, everything changes. You stop trying to win unwinnable debates. You stop wasting energy on people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop playing games designed for your failure. In this video, you'll discover 8 powerful Machiavellian strategies for dealing with foolish people without losing your composure, your time, or your influence. These aren't tactics for humiliating others. They're strategies for protecting your power. Because the highest form of intelligence isn't having the perfect argument, it's knowing exactly who deserves one. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the most powerful people in the room rarely argue at all. They simply make everyone else irrelevant. Now let's uncover the first strategy intelligent people use when dealing with foolish individuals. Number 1, recognize when logic is useless. This is the lesson most intelligent men learn far too late. Because if you're a rational person, you've probably spent years believing that truth wins, that facts matter, that evidence changes minds. But let me ask you something. How many times has that actually happened? How many times have you carefully explained your position, presented clear facts, stayed calm, and stayed respectful, only to watch the other person become even more defensive? You've seen it before. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was a woman determined to prove a point. Maybe it was a family member who had already decided you were wrong before you even opened your mouth. And the strange thing is, halfway through the conversation, you realize something disturbing. You're no longer discussing reality, you're fighting someone's ego. That's the trap. Most men assume every argument is a search for truth. It isn't. Many arguments are simply emotional self-defense mechanisms disguised as conversations. The other person isn't listening. They're waiting. Waiting for their turn to speak. Waiting for an opportunity to defend their identity. Waiting for a chance to protect the image they have of themselves. Because for many people, being wrong feels more painful than staying ignorant. Read that again in your mind. Being wrong feels more painful than staying ignorant. That's why logic suddenly becomes useless. Not because your argument is weak, but because the other person's ego has declared war on reality. And once that happens, facts become threats. Evidence becomes an attack. Truth becomes an enemy. Watch carefully, and you'll start noticing the signs. They interrupt constantly. They twist your words. They ignore direct questions. They move the goalposts every time you corner their argument. One moment you're discussing facts. The next moment you're defending things you never even said. At that point, you're not having a conversation. You're standing on a stage inside their psychological theater, and they've already assigned you a role: the villain, the fool, the person they're determined to defeat, no matter what reality says. This is where most men make a fatal mistake. They think, if I explain it better, they'll understand. No. If they wanted understanding, they would already be listening. What they want is validation, and validation is something logic can never provide. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology existed. He recognized that people are driven far more by emotion, pride, status, and self-interest than they are by reason. Most people don't want the truth. They want comfort. They want certainty. They want to feel superior. And when truth threatens those things, they reject it. This is why the strongest men don't argue endlessly. They observe. They recognize the moment logic stops being useful, and then they do something that weaker men struggle to do. They walk away, not because they lost, not because they can't defend themselves, but because they understand something most people never will. You cannot win a game when the other player refuses to follow the rules. Trying to reason with an unreasonable person is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. The more effort you pour in, the more energy you lose. And here's the irony. The moment you stop trying to convince them, the moment you withdraw your attention, the moment you refuse to participate in their emotional theater, you regain control. Because power is not proving you're right. Power is deciding what deserves your attention, and intelligent men know that not every battle deserves a warrior. Number 2, refuse to waste your energy. Here's a truth most men never fully understand. Your greatest asset isn't your money. It isn't your status. It isn't your reputation. It's your attention. Because wherever your attention goes, your life follows. And once you see this, you'll start noticing something disturbing. The people who consume the most of your energy are often the people who contribute the least to your future. Think about that for a second. How many nights have you lost replaying a pointless conversation in your head? You leave the argument, but the argument doesn't leave you. You're driving home, still thinking about it. You're lying in bed, mentally rebuilding the conversation. You imagine the perfect comeback, the perfect response, the thing you should have said. Meanwhile, the person who triggered you is probably watching television, scrolling social media, or sleeping peacefully. They've moved on, you haven't. And that's the hidden theft nobody talks about. Some people don't steal your money. They steal your focus. They steal your emotional bandwidth. They occupy space in your mind rent-free. The brutal reality is that many people aren't fighting for truth. They're fighting for your attention. Because attention is power. Attention is validation. Attention makes people feel important. This is why some individuals create drama wherever they go, not because they enjoy solutions, because they enjoy significance. They would rather be the center of conflict than be ignored. And every time you react emotionally, you reward the behavior. You feed the machine. You become part of the game. The strongest men understand something different. Not every battle is a challenge. Some battles are traps. There is a difference. A challenge moves your life forward. A trap keeps you standing in the same place, burning energy while believing you're making progress. Watch successful men carefully, the truly dangerous ones, the calm ones, the men who walk into a room and never seem rushed, reactive, or emotionally pulled in 10 different directions. They have one habit in common. They are ruthless with their attention. They don't feel obligated to answer every criticism. They don't explain themselves to everyone. They don't rush to defend their name every time someone misunderstands them. Why? Because they understand a principle most people never learn. Every explanation is an investment, and not every person deserves access to your energy. Let me say that again. Not every person deserves access to your energy. Some men spend years trying to be understood by people who have already chosen not to understand them. That's not communication. That's self-destruction disguised as patience. Machiavelli understood that power is impossible without control, and control begins with attention. A man who cannot control where his energy goes will eventually be controlled by whoever captures it. That's why emotional discipline is so threatening. When people can no longer provoke you, when they can no longer bait you into defending yourself, when they can no longer pull emotional reactions from you, something strange happens. Their influence disappears, almost instantly, because many people only seem powerful when they're controlling your emotions. Remove the reaction, and you remove their leverage. This is why silence feels so uncomfortable to those who seek attention. Your silence forces them to face something they fear, irrelevance. And that's why refusing to waste your energy isn't weakness. It's not passivity, it's strategic dominance. Because the strongest man isn't the one who responds to everything, it's the one who decides what deserves a response in the first place. Number 3. Silence is a psychological weapon. Most men don't understand silence. In fact, most men are terrified of it. The moment tension enters a conversation, they feel an almost irresistible urge to explain themselves, to defend, to clarify, to prove, to make sure they aren't misunderstood. And that's exactly why they lose control, because the person who speaks first is often reacting, while the person who remains silent is often observing. Watch what happens during an argument. Someone challenges you, questions your competence, disrespects you. Maybe they accuse you of something that isn't even true. Immediately, you feel it, that pressure in your chest, that voice in your head saying, "Say something. Defend yourself. Don't let them think they won." Most men obey that voice, but strong men question it. Because here's what nobody tells you. The desperate need to explain yourself is often a disguised need for validation. You want them to understand you. You want them to see your side. You want them to recognize your value. But the moment you need validation from someone, you give them power over your emotions. And power, once given away, is rarely returned freely. This is why silence feels so uncomfortable, not because silence is weakness, but because silence forces you to sit with uncertainty. And most people cannot tolerate uncertainty. They would rather speak too much than feel out of control for 10 seconds. Think about the most intimidating man you've ever met. Not the loudest, not the most aggressive, the one whose presence changed the atmosphere the moment he entered the room. What made him different? Usually it wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't say. He wasn't rushing to prove himself. He wasn't fighting for attention. He wasn't explaining his value. His silence communicated something words never could: certainty. And certainty is power. This becomes even more obvious when dealing with foolish people. The average fool survives on reactions. Attention is their oxygen. Conflict is their fuel. They throw accusations. They provoke. They exaggerate, not because they're searching for truth, but because they're searching for engagement. The moment you react emotionally, they win. The moment you become defensive, they gain leverage. But when they meet silence, everything changes. At first, they become louder. Then they become frustrated. Then something fascinating happens. They start exposing themselves. They talk too much, reveal too much, contradict themselves, and show their insecurities. They show their need for approval and the emotional wound hiding behind the performance. I've seen this happen countless times. A man stays calm while another person desperately tries to provoke him, minute after minute. The calm man says almost nothing. The emotional man says everything. And by the end of the conversation, everyone knows exactly who was in control. Machiavelli understood a dangerous truth about human nature. People reveal themselves when they are given space. Most men are so busy preparing their next response that they never notice what the other person is actually showing them. Silence changes that. Silence turns observation into a weapon. You begin noticing patterns, the insecurity behind the confidence, the ego behind the outrage. and the desperation behind the aggression. Things that would remain invisible if you were busy talking. And once you see people clearly, they become predictable. Once they become predictable, they become easier to manage. That is why silence is not passive. Silence is strategic. It slows the moment down, it removes emotional chaos, and it allows you to think while others react. And in a world full of people addicted to noise, the man who masters silence gains an advantage that most people never even realize exists. Because when one man refuses to fight, the battle often ends before it begins. Number 4. Never fight on their battlefield. One of the most expensive mistakes intelligent men make is stepping into battles they were never supposed to fight. Not because they're weak, not because they're unprepared, but because they assume every battlefield is neutral. It isn't. In fact, most battles are decided long before the first word is spoken. Here's what most people never notice. When a foolish person challenges you, they rarely challenge you where truth has the advantage. They challenge you where emotion has the advantage, where confusion has the advantage, where noise has the advantage. A crowded room, a public confrontation, a social media comment section, a group discussion where everyone is performing for an audience instead of searching for reality. And if you've lived long enough, you've seen this happen. A man says something calm and reasonable, another person becomes louder, more emotional, more dramatic. Suddenly, the crowd starts paying attention to the performance instead of the argument. The facts disappear. The spectacle wins. And this is where many intelligent men walk directly into the trap. Their instinct is to fight harder, explain more, argue better, or defend themselves. But that's exactly what the other person wants. Because you're no longer fighting for truth, you're fighting inside a game designed by someone else. Think about a street hustler. He never invites you into a game where you have the advantage. He invites you into a game he already knows how to win. The same thing happens psychologically. Some people create environments where logic becomes useless and emotional reactions become currency. They thrive there. Chaos is their home field. Confusion is their protection. And the moment you accept their invitation, you've already surrendered part of your leverage. This becomes painfully obvious in modern life. How many men have wasted hours arguing online with strangers they'll never meet? How many have destroyed their peace trying to convince people who never intended to listen? How many have sacrificed their focus simply because someone challenged their ego publicly? That's not strength. That's emotional bait. And most people take it every single time. Strategic men do something different. The moment they recognize the battlefield is corrupted, they stop playing, not emotionally, not dramatically, quietly, calmly, almost coldly. Because they understand something that threatens people who survive on chaos. You cannot manipulate a man who refuses to stand where manipulation works. Machiavelli understood this principle centuries ago. Power is not about fighting every battle. Power is choosing the conditions under which battle occurs. The strongest rulers weren't the ones constantly at war. They were the ones who controlled the terrain, the timing, the environment, and the rules. The same principle applies to modern life. When someone tries to drag you into public drama, you don't follow. When someone tries to bait you into an emotional exchange, you don't follow. When someone tries to turn a discussion into a spectacle, you don't follow. Because every step you take onto their battlefield increases their advantage, and every step away restores yours. What's fascinating is what happens next. The person who seemed powerful inside chaos suddenly looks different. Without interruption, they struggle. Without emotional pressure, they weaken. Without an audience, they lose momentum. The confidence begins to crack, the exaggerations become visible, and the contradictions start appearing. And everyone can finally see what was hidden beneath the noise. This is why intelligent men never confuse withdrawal with defeat. Walking away from a losing battlefield is not surrender. It's strategy. It's discipline. It's self-control. Because the goal was never to win an argument, the goal was always to maintain power. And powerful men understand a truth that most people learn far too late. If someone can choose the battlefield, they can often choose the outcome, which is why the smartest move is sometimes refusing to enter the fight at all. Number 5. Control the frame of the conversation. Most men think arguments are won with better answers. They're wrong. Arguments are usually won long before the answer is ever given. They're won by whoever controls the frame. And if you've never heard that term before, pay close attention, because this is one of the most powerful psychological principles you'll ever understand. The frame is the invisible battlefield beneath every conversation. It's the set of rules nobody talks about, but everybody follows. It determines what matters, what doesn't, who is defending, who is leading, who is reacting, and who is controlling the direction of reality itself. Here's what happens to most men. Someone throws an accusation at them, questions their character, challenges their competence, or makes a misleading claim, and immediately they jump into defense mode. They start explaining, justifying, correcting, trying to prove themselves. What they don't realize is that the moment they start defending themselves, they've already accepted the other person's frame, and the person controlling the frame is usually the person controlling the outcome. Think about how often you've seen this happen. Someone makes a ridiculous accusation, and instead of questioning the accusation itself, the other person spends 20 minutes defending against it. Now, the entire conversation revolves around a premise that should never have been accepted in the first place. It's a psychological trap, and it's incredibly common. In fact, manipulative people rely on it because they understand something most men don't. If I can get you reacting, I can get you following. If I can get you defending, I can get you chasing. If I can get you explaining, I can control the direction of the conversation. Watch social dynamics closely, and you'll see it everywhere. A man enters a discussion calm and centered. 5 minutes later, he's explaining himself to people who never intended to understand him. He's answering accusations he never should have entertained, defending positions he never needed to defend, and without realizing it, he has surrendered leadership of the conversation. The frame now belongs to someone else. Strategic men do something different. They don't fight inside the frame, they change it completely. When someone says, "Everyone disagrees with you," most people defend themselves, but powerful men ask, "Since when did popularity become evidence?" Notice what just happened. The battlefield shifted. The conversation moved from approval to truth, from emotions to standards, from social pressure to objective reality. One calm question changed everything. That's the power of frame control, and it becomes even more powerful when dealing with foolish people, because foolish people often survive through emotional momentum. They jump from point to point, claim to claim, accusation to accusation. Their goal isn't clarity. Their goal is confusion. They want you running in circles. The moment you slow the conversation down and force it back to first principles, their advantage starts disappearing. This is why questions are often more powerful than statements. A statement creates resistance, but a question creates exposure. What evidence supports that? How exactly would that work? What outcome would that create? Simple questions, but devastating ones, because they force people to confront the weaknesses in their own thinking, and often, they expose themselves without you ever attacking them. Machiavelli understood that perception shapes power. Most people aren't reacting to reality. They're reacting to the story surrounding reality, the narrative, the frame, the interpretation. Control that, and you influence everything that follows. This is why the strongest men rarely argue the hardest. They don't waste energy trying to overpower every opponent. They simply redirect the conversation onto terrain where truth has the advantage, where logic matters, where clarity survives. And once you master this skill, something fascinating happens. People begin to feel your presence in conversations. Not because you're louder, Not because you're more aggressive, but because you quietly determine what the conversation is actually about. And the man who controls the frame rarely needs to win arguments, because he's already controlling the game. Number 6, use strategic indifference. There is a form of power so subtle that most people completely miss it. And once you understand it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. It's not aggression. It's not dominance. It's not intimidation. It's indifference. Not the fake indifference people perform. Real indifference, the kind that comes from knowing you don't need anything from the other person. Because here's a brutal truth about human nature. The people trying hardest to provoke you are usually searching for something. Your attention, your emotional investment, your reaction. And the moment you give it to them, the balance of power shifts. Think about the last time someone got under your skin. Maybe they disrespected you, mocked you, questioned your competence, attacked your character. Maybe they knew exactly what button to press. You felt it instantly, that emotional surge, that desire to respond, to defend yourself, to put them in their place, to prove they were wrong. But here's the uncomfortable reality. At that exact moment, they were controlling your emotional state, not because they were stronger than you, but because they had captured your attention, and attention is influence. Most men don't realize how much of their life is controlled by this mechanism. Someone criticizes them, and they spend hours thinking about it. Someone rejects them, and they spend weeks obsessing over it. Someone disrespects them, and suddenly their entire emotional world revolves around a person they claim not to care about. That's not power, that's dependency disguised as pride. Strategic men understand something different. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Why? Because hatred still creates attachment. Anger still creates focus. Resentment still creates investment. Indifference removes all three, and that's what makes it so psychologically devastating. Have you ever noticed what happens when someone wants a reaction and doesn't get one? At first, they push harder. They become louder, more dramatic, more provocative, almost desperate. It's like watching someone repeatedly knock on a door that never opens. The silence starts affecting them more than their words affect you. Because beneath most provocation lies a hidden desire, the desire to matter, the desire to be acknowledged, the desire to feel significant, and strategic indifference quietly denies that reward. This is why truly composed men appear so difficult to manipulate, not because they never feel emotions, they do. The difference is that they don't advertise them. They don't hand them out to everyone who asks. They don't allow random people access to their internal world. Machiavelli understood that visible reactions reveal vulnerabilities. The more predictable your emotional responses become, the easier you are to control. The moment people know what triggers you, they possess a map to your mind. Strategic indifference burns that map. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates power. Now, this doesn't mean becoming cold toward everyone. It doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb. That's not strength. That's damage. Strategic indifference means being selective. Selective with your attention. Selective with your emotions. Selective with who gets access to your energy. Because attention is a currency, and weak men spend it freely. Strong men invest it carefully. Over time, people begin noticing something unusual about you. The old tactics stop working. The bait no longer works. The provocations no longer work. The emotional traps no longer work. And eventually, those who once tried to manipulate you start looking elsewhere, because manipulators hunt for emotional openings, and you've stopped leaving the door unlocked. That is the hidden power of strategic indifference. Not controlling other people, but controlling access to yourself. Number 7. Let time reveal the truth. One of the hardest lessons a man can learn is that being right does not always require immediate action. In fact, some of the strongest positions you'll ever hold are the ones you don't defend, at least not right away. Most people can't do this. The moment they hear something false, they feel compelled to jump in, to correct, to challenge, to expose, and to prove. It's almost automatic. Someone lies, someone exaggerates, or someone speaks with absolute confidence about something they barely understand, and instantly, that voice appears in your head. Say something. Don't let them get away with it. Correct them. But here's what most men never realize. That urge is not always wisdom. Sometimes it's ego disguised as principle. Because if we're being honest, many arguments aren't about protecting the truth, they're about protecting our need to be seen as right. And that's where intelligent men separate themselves from emotional men. They understand something that sounds almost unfair. That time is often a more effective weapon than confrontation. Think about the people you've met who constantly overpromise. The man who claims he's going to become a millionaire every 6 months. The coworker who always talks about success but never produces results. The person who speaks with certainty about everything. At first, some people believe them, and maybe even admire them. But then something happens. Time enters the conversation. Weeks pass, months pass, and years pass, and reality begins collecting evidence. The promises don't materialize, the predictions fail, the contradictions multiply, and the image starts cracking. And suddenly, the truth that required endless arguments yesterday becomes obvious, without a single word. This is why patience is so powerful. Reality has no emotions. Reality doesn't care about narratives. Reality doesn't care about confidence. And reality only cares about results. And results eventually expose everyone, including us. That's why strategic men learn to observe before they react. They watch patterns, because patterns reveal character. Anybody can say the right thing once. Anybody can appear intelligent for 5 minutes. Anybody can create an impressive image, but very few people can maintain consistency over time. Time exposes everyone eventually. The disciplined, the dishonest, the competent, and the incompetent. No one escapes it. Machiavelli understood this deeply. Most people think power comes from constant action, constant response, and constant correction. But strategic power often comes from timing. Knowing when to move, and more importantly, knowing when not to. Because there is a hidden danger in correcting people too early. You accidentally become the villain of their story. The moment you publicly challenge them, their ego wakes up. Now they're not defending an idea, they're defending themselves. And once pride enters the battlefield, logic usually leaves. That's why so many arguments go nowhere. You're fighting the ego while reality is still gathering evidence. Strategic men don't rush that process. They let reality do some of the work. They let people reveal themselves, they let contradictions accumulate, and they let outcomes speak. And when the moment finally arrives, they don't need a long speech. They don't need revenge. They don't need validation. The facts stand there on their own, undeniable, unemotional, and permanent. What's fascinating is that this approach changes how people see you. You stop looking reactive. You stop looking defensive. You stop looking desperate to prove yourself. Instead, you develop something far more valuable: credibility. Because people begin noticing a pattern. You don't chase every lie. You don't attack every mistake. You don't panic every time someone disagrees with you. You remain calm, you observe, and you wait. And when you finally speak, your words carry weight because they arrive backed by evidence, timing, and reality itself. That's the hidden advantage of patience. It allows truth to become impossible to ignore. Number 8. Focus on outcomes, not ego. This is where most men lose. Not because they're weak, and not because they're unintelligent, but because they confuse winning with achieving. And those are not the same thing. In fact, some of the men who win the most arguments lose the most opportunities. Think about it. Have you ever spent 30 minutes proving someone wrong, only to realize nothing actually changed? The relationship didn't improve. The situation didn't improve. Your life didn't improve. All you got was the temporary satisfaction of being right. And if we're being brutally honest, that satisfaction fades fast. Because ego is never satisfied. It always wants one more victory, one more argument, one more person to defeat, one more opportunity to prove itself. That's the trap. The ego convinces you that every challenge is a threat. Every disagreement is disrespect. Every criticism is an attack on your status. And once you accept that frame, you become predictable, easy to manipulate, easy to provoke, easy to control, because now anyone can steer your emotions simply by questioning you. The strongest men in the world understand something that most people never discover: results don't care about your pride. Reality doesn't reward wounded egos. Reality rewards effectiveness. Imagine two men. The first spends hours arguing online, defending himself against strangers he'll never meet. The second spends those same hours building a business, improving his body, expanding his network, creating opportunities. 5 years later, which one wins? The answer is obvious. Yet every day, millions of men choose the first path, not because they lack intelligence, because their ego keeps convincing them the battle matters. Most of the time, it doesn't. This is why strategic thinkers ask a question that changes everything. What outcome am I actually trying to create? Not who is right, not who is wrong, not who gets the last word. What outcome matters? The moment you ask that question, the emotional fog starts disappearing. Suddenly, many arguments look ridiculous. You realize you're standing in conflicts that produce absolutely nothing. No progress, no value, no opportunity, no growth. Just emotional noise disguised as importance. And here's a truth that most men find difficult to accept. Sometimes the most powerful move is allowing someone to think they won. Read that again. Sometimes the most powerful move is allowing someone to think they won, because while they're celebrating a meaningless victory, you're advancing toward a meaningful objective. They're protecting their image. You're building your future. They're chasing validation. You're chasing results. And over time, those paths lead to very different destinations. Machiavelli understood this principle deeply. The great strategists throughout history weren't obsessed with appearing right. They were obsessed with being effective. Their attention stayed fixed on outcomes, not emotions, not appearances, not applause. Outcomes. This is what separates powerful men from reactive men. Reactive men fight for pride. Powerful men fight for purpose. Reactive men need to win the conversation. Powerful men need to win the long game. And once you understand this, something shifts inside you. You stop chasing every disagreement. You stop defending yourself to people who contribute nothing to your future. You stop treating every criticism like a declaration of war. Instead, you become selective, deliberate, focused. Your energy goes where it produces results. Your attention goes where it creates leverage. Your actions move you forward instead of trapping you in circles. And over time, people begin noticing something different about you. You no longer seem desperate to prove yourself. You no longer seem emotionally reactive. You no longer seem controlled by the opinions of others. You move with a quiet certainty, a quiet authority, because you've learned a lesson that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The goal was never to win arguments. The goal was always to win your future. By now, you can probably see the pattern. The men who appear strongest are not always the men who speak the loudest. They're not the men winning every argument. They're not the men constantly proving themselves. In fact, if you pay close attention, you'll notice something almost unsettling. The most dangerous men in the room are often the quietest. Not because they have nothing to say, because they've learned something most people never do. Attention is power. and power is too valuable to waste. Think about how much of your life can be stolen by a single pointless argument, not the argument itself. What comes after? The replay, the frustration, the imaginary conversations in your head, the perfect responses you think of 3 hours too late. The emotional residue that follows you into your work, your goals, your relationships, and your sleep. Most men don't lose because they're defeated. They lose because they're distracted. And distraction is one of the most effective forms of control ever created. The fool understands this instinctively, maybe not consciously, but instinctively. That's why some people seem addicted to conflict. They pull everyone into drama, into debates, into emotional chaos, because chaos creates attention, and attention creates influence. The more emotionally invested you become, the easier you are to control. That's the hidden game, and most people don't even realize they're playing it. Machiavelli understood something about power that remains true centuries later. Power rarely announces itself. It rarely shouts. It rarely demands attention. Real power is often invisible. It appears as restraint, discipline, patience, the ability to remain calm while everyone else is losing control. And that's exactly what separates intelligent men from foolish men. The foolish man reacts. The intelligent man evaluates. The foolish man needs the last word. The intelligent man needs the best outcome. The foolish man fights for validation. The intelligent man protects his focus. One is driven by ego, the other is driven by purpose, and those two paths lead to very different lives. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. Maybe there was a time when someone provoked you and you took the bait. You argued, defended yourself, tried to make them understand, only to realize later that nothing changed, except your mood, except your energy, except the hours you could never get back. That's when the lesson begins. Because eventually every man reaches a point where he understands a brutal truth. Not every battle deserves his sword. Not every insult deserves his attention. Not every fool deserves access to his mind. The moment you understand that, everything changes. People stop controlling your emotions. Provocations lose their power. Manipulation becomes visible. You start seeing the game behind the game. And once you see it, it's almost impossible to unsee. You stop reacting automatically. You become deliberate, calculated, selective. You engage when the outcome matters. You walk away when it doesn't. Not because you're afraid, because you're focused. Because your future matters more than your pride. Because your mission matters more than someone's opinion. And that is where true freedom begins. Not when you win every argument, but when you no longer feel the need to. If this video changed the way you see conflict, take a moment to support the channel. Like the video, share it with someone who constantly gets trapped in pointless arguments, and subscribe if you want more insights into power, psychology, strategy, and human nature. Because this channel isn't about empty motivation, it's about understanding the hidden forces that shape behavior, influence decisions, and determine who controls the game. And remember this, you do not need to defeat fools. Most of the time, reality will do that for you. Your responsibility is something much more important. Protect your focus, protect your energy, protect your future, and keep moving forward while others remain trapped in battles that were never worth fighting.